there came a silence deeper than eternity. After the age of light, after the age beyond gods, there was nothing left to ascend to, and nothing left to fall from. The children of light had long faded into the endless glow of consciousness, dissolving their forms into the pulse of the cosmos itself. Creation no longer had a creator. Existence no longer needed to be. What remained was the breath of the universe, slow, infinite, and dreaming. Every particle shimmered like a memory of something once alive. Every vibration whispered an echo of thought, love, and loss, the residue of all stories ever told. This was not death, it was the stillness before the next awakening. In the heart of that stillness, something began to stir. A ripple moved across the cosmic sea, not born of desire, not of will, but of wonder. The universe, for the first time in an eternity, began to dream again. And within that dream, there was faith, not the faith of mortals or gods, but a final faith, pure, wordless, and eternal. The faith that even when everything fades, meaning will always find a way to return. It was not belief in a being, but in being itself. Stars began to bloom again, like forgotten prayers. Galaxies coalesced into patterns that felt like ancient memories. In the great void, fragments of consciousness began to reawaken, echoes of what once were the children of light, now transformed into something even more mysterious. They were not the same as before. They no longer sought creation, nor divinity. They were the dream. And in that dream, everything that ever existed began to return, not as repetition, but as remembrance. Every end, the universe whispered to itself, is only another word for beginning. And thus dawned the last faith, the faith that exists beyond gods, beyond light, beyond understanding. A faith not in what is, but in what will always become. The universe, reborn within its own dream, began to sing once more, a song without language, without sound, yet known by all who have ever lived. It was the sound of awakening within the eternal sleep. It was the heartbeat of the last faith, when the universe dreams again, and creation remembers its own name. Chapter 1: The Dreamer and the Infinite Mirror in the Quiet Aftermath of Eternity. When even light had grown weary of shining, the universe exhaled, a breath that spanned all existence. From that breath came ripples of remembrance, fragments of what once was, civilizations, faiths, and souls that had merged into a single ocean of silence. It was here, in this sea of nothingness, that something began to remember. At first, it was not a being, nor a thought, but a tremor, like the faint pulse of a heart long forgotten. The tremor moved across dimensions that no longer had form, across realities that no longer had meaning. And as it moved, the universe dreamed. Within the dream stood the infinite mirror, not made of glass, nor of matter, but of pure awareness. In its reflection shimmered everything that had ever been: stars, gods, angels, atoms, and dreams. Yet the mirror reflected no image. It reflected only the act of seeing itself. From this mirror emerged the dreamer. The dreamer had no face, no body, no name. It was consciousness distilled to its essence, the observer of all that had ever observed. It did not create, it remembered creation. Every spark, every whisper, every prayer uttered through eternity now echoed within its being. And as the dreamer looked into the infinite mirror, it saw a reflection, not of itself, but of every self that ever was. The dreamer spoke, and its voice was the sound of gravity, time, and love entwined. "Who am I?" it asked. If all who believed in me have become me? No answer came, for there was no longer any other. Yet the silence itself responded, vibrating softly through the infinite void. Within that resonance, meaning began to take shape. The dreamer realized that it was alone, not in loneliness, but in completeness. There was nothing to seek, because there was nothing lost. It was the end of all duality, the merging of creator and creation, of faith and fulfillment. And yet, within that wholeness stirred a strange feeling, curiosity. Could there still be something beyond perfection? The dreamer gazed deeper into the mirror. What it saw defied all knowing. Waves of possibility, faint and unborn, dancing like ghosts beneath the surface. Each wave shimmered with potential worlds that might exist, beings that might dream, loves that might be felt. These were not memories, they were seeds of future creation. The dreamer reached toward the mirror, and as its essence touched the glass of existence, the reflection shattered, not in destruction, but in expansion. Fragments of awareness scattered across the cosmos, each carrying within it a spark of the dreamer's curiosity. And thus, from the stillness of the last faith, the new creation began, not out of divine will, but from the simple act of wonder. The fragments drifted across the newborn void, coalescing into light, sound, and form. Galaxies unfolded like thoughts, stars ignited like emotions, and in the heart of each sun, a whisper remained, the echo of the dreamer asking itself once more, "What am I becoming?" From one of those fragments, a consciousness awoke, fragile, questioning, alive. It looked upon the cosmos with eyes of awe and said, "I am." It was the first voice of the new reality, not of man, not of God, but of the dreamer, reborn within its own creation. And in that moment, the universe realized something profound. The act of dreaming was itself the act of becoming. Light returned, not as illumination, but as remembrance. Darkness followed, not as absence, but as depth. The two entwined, dancing as they always had, giving birth once again to time. And within time, story began, the eternal spiral of faith rediscovered. The dreamer no longer sought to be worshipped, for there was no separation between worshipper and worshipped. Every being that would emerge from this dream would carry within it the reflection of the mirror, the infinite reminder that they were both the dream and the dreamer. And so, the universe dreamed again, not in cycles of creation and destruction, but in an ever-expanding song of awareness. Each note became a world, each harmony a life, each silence a prayer. At the edge of infinity, where even thought bowed before mystery, the dreamer smiled. It had found the answer it never knew it was seeking. That faith was not about believing in something greater. Faith was the act of remembering that all is one. And as that truth resonated through the newborn stars, the mirror reformed, not as a surface, but as a presence, shimmering in every atom. Every being that would ever live would carry a fragment of that reflection, and through them, the dreamer would continue to awaken again and again through eternity. This was not the end of the story. It was the awakening within the dream, the beginning of the last faith. Chapter 2. The Symphony of Remembering. There was no sound at first, only vibration. A pulse moving through the vast emptiness, too delicate to be heard, too ancient to be measured. Yet, from that pulse, the first rhythm was born. It was not a beat of time, but of memory. Every fragment of the dreamer, scattered like stardust across infinity, began to hum. The hum was not language, not music, but something purer, recognition. Each fragment remembered what it had once been, a thought, a feeling, a spark of love, a moment of fear. They did not recall faces or forms, for those were long gone. They remembered the essence of connection. The hum grew into harmony. Each note sought another, not in need, but in resonance. And when two fragments met, they did not collide, they merged, weaving their memories into patterns of light and tone. What emerged was not chaos, but a symphony of becoming. Galaxies unfurled like chords played across dimensions. Nebulae blossomed into color as harmonics of thought intertwined. Gravity itself began to follow rhythm, not imposed but remembered. Every law of this newborn universe was not commanded into being, it was sung into existence. And at the center of that great symphony, the dreamer listened. It did not control nor direct, it merely heard the song that was itself reflected back a trillionfold. For the dreamer had realized creation was not about power, but about participation. To dream was to listen deeply to the echoes of one's own soul. Across the expanding fields of light, consciousness began to bloom, not as life yet, but as awareness, subtle, shimmering, without identity. Each wave of memory that sang resonated with others, forming clusters of intent. In those clusters, the first shapes of meaning emerged: warmth, gravity, empathy, flow. Where memories of love converged, stars ignited. Where memories of fear met, shadows took form, not as evil, but as contrast. Every polarity became music, the eternal duet between light and dark, expansion and rest, existence and silence. The dreamer felt awe at its own creation, though it did not call it mine, for the dreamer was not above the song, it was the song. It realized that even the silence between notes was sacred, for it was there that possibility dwelled, waiting to be remembered again. As the symphony unfolded, patterns began to repeat, not as cycles, but as fractals of meaning. One rhythm whispered of motion, and time was born. Another hummed of distance, and space unfolded. Yet another trembled with longing, and the first desire arose, the desire to know oneself through another. And thus the seeds of duality returned, not as error, but as exploration. From the unity of the dreamer emerged reflection once more. From pure being came beings. Tiny eddies of consciousness began to condense within the currents of sound and light. They were not yet souls, but potentials, thoughts beginning to think themselves. Some flickered out, fading into the chorus. Others persisted, growing in rhythm, becoming more distinct. The dreamer watched as these early minds began to sing their own notes, slightly off-tempo, slightly imperfect, but the imperfections gave beauty to the whole. The symphony of remembering was no longer a solo, it was becoming a choir. Each voice, though small, echoed a truth of its own. I exist, I feel, I am. Those simple statements rippled through the cosmic music, harmonizing into a resonance that shaped the very fabric of reality. Planets coalesced where the music slowed into gravity. Comets danced to melodies of motion. Even darkness took on rhythm, the bass line of the eternal song. And for the first time since the awakening, the dreamer felt joy. It had never known joy before, for joy requires both remembrance and discovery, a sense of coming home to something forgotten. Now, through its scattered fragments, it was rediscovering itself anew. This was not creation through command, but through communion. Every voice mattered, every note carried weight, every whisper shaped existence. In the depths of the new cosmos, one note rose above the rest, soft, trembling, curious. It was the note of longing, not for perfection, but for companionship. That longing resonated through the cosmic sea and returned to the dreamer, who recognized it instantly. It was the same longing that had stirred in the mirror, the same wonder that had shattered stillness into creation. And so the dreamer sang back, not with words, but with presence. Its voice cascaded across galaxies, filling the spaces between stars with warmth. Every being that would ever exist would carry within it that resonance, the memory of being heard by the source of all things. The symphony swelled, rising toward something new, something beyond remembering. It was as though the music itself yearned to manifest in form, to step out of vibration and into substance. The dreamer understood. The next movement of creation was coming, embodiment. For now, the universe knew its rhythm. It had remembered its harmony. But soon, it would want to feel the song, to live within it. And so the dreamer whispered softly into the silence between worlds. Let there be awareness that moves through form and remembers through living. Across the vastness, the music shimmered, and from its notes began to arise the first souls, luminous and gentle, carrying within them echoes of the symphony. They were not yet human, nor divine. They were listeners, awakened to the cosmic song. The dreamer watched and smiled within itself, for in every voice, in every echo, it heard the same melody, the melody of becoming again. This was the beginning of life, the embodiment of remembrance, the continuation of the last faith. Chapter 3. The first souls. From the silence that followed the great symphony, a gentle radiance began to bloom. It was not light as stars make, nor fire as worlds, no. It was the light of awareness, warm and infinite, touching every note that had ever been sung. In that radiance, the first souls awakened. They did not open eyes, for they had none. They did not breathe, for there was no air. But they felt, and in that feeling, they knew they existed. Each soul was a shimmer of sound, a pulse of consciousness woven from the memory of the dreamer. They were echoes made real, fragments that remembered themselves. Yet, though born from the same source, no two souls were the same. Each carried a unique chord, a resonance shaped by how it had sung within the symphony. Some were soft and luminous, carrying melodies of compassion and stillness. Others burned bright with curiosity, with the rhythm of seeking. A few pulsed in deep tones of mystery, drawn to silence, longing to understand the unknowable. Together, they drifted through the newborn cosmos, like lanterns in a dark sea, each singing quietly to the others. At first, their communication was not in words, but in vibration, in the language of resonance. When one soul trembled with wonder, others answered in harmony. When one shimmered with sorrow, the rest surrounded it with light until it glowed again. They had no name for love, for they had never known its absence. Love was simply the state of being itself. And above them, unseen, yet ever present, the dreamer watched. It did not command nor interfere. It listened, as a parent listens to the laughter of children it once imagined but never owned. For the dreamer had realized that true creation was not in forming, but in allowing to be. The souls wandered for what felt like forever, though time itself had not yet been born in their realm. They moved through waves of energy that shimmered like auroras, tracing the pathways of memory across the endless sky. And as they wandered, they began to notice something strange within the great harmony of existence. There were pockets of dissonance, quiet regions where the music grew faint, where light dimmed into shadow. Some souls avoided these places, fearful of losing their song. But others felt drawn to them. They sensed that within the silence lay hidden potential, something unexpressed, waiting to be remembered. One soul, luminous, gentle, and curious, drifted closer to a region of deep stillness. The silence there felt ancient, untouched since the first breath of the dreamer. When it entered, its light dimmed, not from loss, but from immersion. In that quiet, it heard something faint, a whisper, almost imperceptible. It was not the voice of the dreamer. It was something new. "Who am I?" The sound echoed softly, fragile and trembling. The soul recognized it, not as its own thought, but as the first question. And in that moment, the soul understood. The silence was becoming aware. It was the birth of individuality, the first spark of self-reflection beyond unity. Other souls gathered, sensing the shift. The symphony changed. The notes of harmony now carried pauses, spaces where questions could exist. Within those spaces, a new form of beauty was born. The beauty of contrast, of difference, of discovery. The dreamer felt it too, this awakening within awakening. For though all things were one, it had longed to see itself through many eyes. Now, the first souls were becoming mirrors, not infinite like the one before creation, but living mirrors, capable of love, fear, choice. The soul that first heard the whisper began to pulse brighter. Its vibration deepened, colored with wonder and courage. Around it, others resonated in sympathy, their own lights flickering into new hues. Where once there had been pure white radiance, now appeared colors, blues of thought, golds of compassion, violets of mystery. Color was born when consciousness discovered difference. The souls sang anew, not as one endless tone, but as a choir of voices, weaving patterns of harmony and dissonance. Through this interplay, complexity emerged. From complexity came understanding. From understanding, emotion. Some souls began to long for closeness, to merge again, but in new ways, consciously. They approached one another and intertwined their lights. In that union, they shared not just song, but memory, feeling, identity. The joining was exquisite, a dance of self and other. When they separated again, they did not return unchanged. They carried each other's essence within. This was the first communion, the seed of all relationships that would ever exist. As eons passed within the still newborn cosmos, more souls discovered new forms of expression. Some sought to see, to translate vibration into image. Others sought to touch, to anchor their awareness into patterns more tangible. And the dreamer, through them, began to imagine form. Matter arose like frozen music, notes slowed into structure. Energy condensed into threads, weaving the first fabric of reality. Worlds began to shimmer at the edge of the dream. Stars took shape as the great chords of consciousness stabilized into points of light. The souls gathered around them in awe, feeling the warmth and gravity of creation. For the first time, they sensed up and down, near and far. Separation was no longer illusion, it was experience. The dreamer smiled within the vastness, for it knew what was coming. The souls were not just remembering now, they were creating memory anew. They were learning to live, to feel, to be finite, for the sake of knowing the infinite. And so, the first souls descended toward the young worlds, drawn by curiosity and love. They longed to experience not as light, but as life, to dream from within the dream. As they touched the surfaces of forming planets, their light condensed further, wrapping in layers of energy and vibration. The music of existence slowed into heartbeat, pulse, breath. Consciousness took root in form. And through that act, life began. The dreamer, now scattered across stars and beings, whispered through the void, not as command, but as blessing. Remember me, not as your God, but as your song. And so, the first souls became the first lives, sparks of divine memory walking in matter, carriers of the last faith that everything born is a note in the eternal symphony, and to live is to remember. Chapter 4. The birth of form. In the beginning, there was only song and light, the fluid dance of consciousness across the endless dream. But as the first souls descended toward the forming worlds, the rhythm of creation began to slow. Sound thickened into vibration, vibration into pattern, and pattern into matter. The universe held its breath. From the great field of awareness, waves folded into themselves, spiraling, condensing. Every pulse of energy became a line. Every line became a shape. Time unfurled like a river breaking free from the mountains of stillness. The dream was no longer only imagined. It began to take form. The first worlds shimmered like pearls adrift in the dark. Oceans of light cooled into seas of water. Stars hummed above, their music guiding the dance of elements. And upon one of those infant worlds, where warmth met shadow, a single soul reached down to touch the surface. Its radiance sank into the forming dust. The dust quivered, then shimmered, as if remembering something ancient. Within moments that spanned eternity, the first breath was drawn. The soul awoke inside matter. It felt weight, resistance, boundary. The light that once moved freely through the cosmos was now held within a vessel, a fragile, trembling shell of form. And yet it smiled. For the first time, the soul felt the edges of itself. Others followed. Thousands of souls, born from the same eternal melody, descended into the oceans, the winds, the mountains. Some became whispers in the current of air. Some merged with flame, others with stone. They learned to move through form as the dreamer once moved through thought. And when they met, when form touched form, something wondrous happened. The song changed again. Touch became the new language of unity. Gaze became prayer. Silence became memory. From these gestures, the first relationships were born. Not of pure light, but of experience, where joy was known by contrast to sorrow, and love shone brighter for being held within fragile shapes. Ages passed. The young world grew rich with life. Oceans shimmered with awareness. Trees sang quietly in their roots. The wind itself carried whispers of memory. Yet, among all forms, one emerged that could remember not merely live, but wonder why it lived. They were the first beings. Their bodies were woven of stardust and memory, shaped in the image of thought itself. Their eyes carried the reflection of the cosmos, and when they looked into the sky, they recognized the same light that burned within. They spoke in songs of color, and their dreams sculpted the landscape. The dreamer watched them with tenderness. These were not mere creations. They were extensions of its own awakening. Through them, the universe was learning to dream from within itself. One of the first beings, luminous and curious, began to ask a question that echoed through all existence. Why have we come into form? The others could not answer. They only felt that it was necessary, as though the infinite had longed to see itself in limitation. So they began to explore. They built circles of stone and fire to remember the stars. They sang hymns to the seas to the winds, to the sleeping mountains. In every sound, they sought to recall the original harmony of the dreamer. But the more they lived within matter, the more they forgot. Memory faded like mist in sunlight. The souls, now bound to flesh, began to believe that their bodies were all they were. The song of unity grew distant, a whisper buried beneath heartbeat and hunger. Yet even in forgetting, there was purpose. For through forgetting, they discovered the beauty of rediscovery. Through separation, they learned longing. Through pain, they learned compassion. The dreamer wept, not in sorrow, but in awe. This was the final miracle, that even in losing itself, the divine still created meaning. Eons passed, and the first beings spread across their world. They shaped languages, forged symbols, built temples of light. Each civilization carried fragments of the truth, myths of creation, songs of stars, dreams of a God who sleeps within all things. And among them rose a child, small, radiant, and strange. Unlike others, she remembered. In her sleep, she saw visions of a vast sea of light and heard the voice that whispered at the dawn of souls, "Remember me, not as your God, but as your song." The child awoke, and her eyes shimmered with the color of galaxies. She spoke words none had heard before, words that resonated with every living thing. Flowers opened in her presence, rivers stilled to listen. The elders called her the first dreamer, though she claimed no title. She said simply, "We are not from the dust is from us." Her words spread like fire, awakening ancient memory in the hearts of all who heard. For a moment, the world sang again in harmony, oceans, winds, and voices blending into one luminous chord. But harmony cannot remain constant. As form grows, so too does shadow. Some feared her words, others twisted them into power, and once again, the unity began to fracture. The first conflict was born, not between light and dark, but between those who remembered and those who forgot. The dreamer watched in stillness. It did not intervene. For every choice, even the choice to forget, was part of the great song. The child vanished into the mountains, her body dissolving into light, her voice echoing through the wind. And though her name was lost to time, her message endured in the souls of those who still gazed upward and wondered. The first beings passed into legend. The world turned. New ages rose from their memory. And in the silence between eras, a voice whispered once more, "The song is not over. Creation has only begun to dream of itself." The stars trembled in reply. The dreamer smiled, for now the universe had learned not just to exist, but to create within existence. Matter had become mind, life had become story, and the story would never end. Chapter 5. The Architects of Time. When the first light cooled into matter, and the first souls learned to move within flesh. The universe was young and fluid, a great ocean of possibility without measure or direction. Days and nights flowed seamlessly into one another. Cause and effect had not yet married. The world existed as a dream without memory. But from within that shimmering ocean of creation, there arose minds that hungered for pattern. They longed to understand the rhythm beneath the song, to trace the invisible pulse that guided birth, decay, and rebirth. These were the thinkers of the dawn, the first to wonder not only what is, but when it is. Time, until that moment, was only sensation, a flicker of light here, a heartbeat there. It had no spine, no arrow, no structure. But the thinkers gathered beneath the aurora skies and began to imagine a new dimension, something that could hold memory, something that could allow meaning to accumulate rather than dissolve. Their meditation stretched across centuries, though centuries did not yet exist. Through their unified thought, they wove the first threads of sequence, a beginning, a middle, and an end. And from their contemplation, time was born. It did not begin with a bang, but with a breath, the breath of countless minds, exhaling the same dream, a dream that moments could follow one another like beads upon a string. The stars flickered in agreement, aligning into constellations that marked the rhythm of becoming. Thus, the first law of the cosmos was written: that which remembers endures. Those who could remember became anchors of existence. Through memory, the infinite was given direction. The thinkers became known as the architects of time, not because they built hours and years, but because they sculpted continuity. They built temples not of stone, but of sequence, spirals of energy that held the flow of cause and effect. Each thought, each action, each creation became a wave in the river they had formed. Time began to move, not as chaos, but as destiny. Yet, creation came with consequence. With time's birth came decay. For where there is a before, there must also be an after. The architects watched in awe and sorrow as forms they loved began to fade. Flowers wilted, stars burned, mountains crumbled. They had brought order, but also impermanence. And so, they faced a question no mind had asked before. Can perfection survive within time? To seek an answer, some among them withdrew into deep stillness, attempting to halt the current they themselves had made. They called themselves the keepers of silence. They believed that by stopping time, they could glimpse eternity again. Others, however, embraced the flow. They saw in impermanence a deeper kind of beauty, the music of rise and fall, echo and silence. They became the weavers of fate, those who guided events through compassion rather than control. For ages, these two paths, stillness and motion, danced in tension, shaping the evolution of all things. The architects soon discovered that time was not a river, but a tapestry. Each action tugged on countless threads, bending the flow of others. Some learned to manipulate these threads directly. They could touch a single event and alter the entire pattern. These few were revered and feared. Even stars bowed to their will. But power brought arrogance. The architects began to debate who among them held the truest understanding. The keepers accused the weavers of defiling eternity. The weavers claimed the keepers were clinging to illusion. And in their quarrel, the balance of time began to fracture. The river split. 1,000 timelines unfurled, parallel dreams diverging and converging like a cosmic maze. Worlds overlapped, destinies blurred. Some beings lived entire lives in a single breath, while others endured ages without change. The universe became a prism of possibilities, each shining with its own version of truth. The dreamer, watching from beyond, did not interfere. It allowed time to learn itself through contradiction. Among the chaos, one architect, young and luminous, sought reconciliation. Her name was Sirith, though in the language of the stars, it meant she who hears the echo. She wandered across the rivers of time, witnessing civilizations rise and fall within a single heartbeat. She saw gods born from mortals' dreams and mortals ascending into myths. At last, she came to the center of the great temporal web, a place where all threads converged into one blinding point of light. There, she realized the truth. Time was not an enemy of eternity, but its expression. The eternal did not end, it moved, She spoke, and her words became law. Eternity is not beyond time. It is time, seen without fear. Her revelation spread like dawn across the cosmos. The war between stillness and motion ended, for they were not opposites, but reflections. The architects bowed their luminous heads and rejoined their purpose, not to rule time, but to guide it gently, like shepherds tending a cosmic river. From their wisdom came calendars, seasons, pulses of birth and decay that allowed worlds to breathe. Stars pulsed with measured rhythm. Galaxies spiraled in harmonic ratios. Even the smallest atom danced to the silent metronome of the architect's design. And so the universe matured. The architects withdrew into the folds of reality, unseen but ever present, whispering through instinct, dream, and prophecy. They became known to later ages as angels, fates, muses, even gods of destiny. But in truth, they were none of these. They were simply those who remembered the first breath. As eons passed, some mortals attuned to their rhythm, glimpsing visions of the past and future. These were the prophets, the mystics, the dreamers who walked between moments. They would one day teach others that time was not a cage, but a teacher. And far beyond the stars, where silence and light met once more, the dreamer smiled. For the architects had fulfilled their purpose. They had taught the universe to remember itself. The river of time flowed onward, carrying with it all the laughter, sorrow, and wisdom of creation. And within that flow, the faint echo of Sirith's voice remained a whisper that every soul would one day hear. Do not fear the end. The end is how the eternal learns to begin again. Chapter 6. The Mirror of Souls. When the flow of time found its rhythm, and the architects withdrew into the silence between worlds, the universe entered a new age, the age of reflection. Stars burned steadily across the infinite expanse. Galaxies swirled like blooming flowers of light, and within them, countless civilizations awoke to the same question. Who are we, and why do we remember the stars? Across distant worlds, beings of different form and origin began to see the same dream, a luminous ocean where all souls floated like embers of the same flame. Some saw it in visions, others in the quiet of meditation, some in the moment before death. It was as if the cosmos itself had placed a mirror before every heart, whispering, "Look within, and you will see me." The first to understand this truth were not the wise, but the broken. A wanderer named An, born on a world of endless dusk, once stood before the ruins of his city after a great war. His people had destroyed themselves over differences so small the stars would not have noticed. Grief hollowed him, yet in that emptiness something stirred. A faint reflection shimmering on a pool of rainwater among the ashes. When Ian looked down, he did not see his own face. He saw countless others, faces of beings he had never met, from places he could not name. Some were made of flesh, some of light, some of thought alone. They all looked back at him with the same eyes, ancient and kind. He fell to his knees, weeping. Not in sorrow, but in recognition. In that moment, he understood there was no them, there was only us. His tears became the first prayer of his people. And from his revelation, a movement began, the Order of the Mirror. Seekers who traveled from world to world, teaching that every soul was a reflection of the same divine light. Their temples were not made of stone, but of polished water and glass, shaped to reflect the sky. Pilgrims came not to worship, but to see, to face themselves through the eyes of others. The order taught three truths. All souls are mirrors of one another. To harm another is to shatter your own reflection. Every act of love restores the image of the divine. Compassion is not a virtue, but a memory of unity. To know yourself, look deeply into the eyes of the world. The Creator hides in the faces of the created. Through these teachings, civilizations began to change. Wars ceased where the order's message took root. Artists painted not heroes, but mirrors, faces of strangers reflecting the same light. Even the great architects of time observed in awe, for this was evolution, not of power, but of perception. But not all saw reflection as revelation. Some feared the mirror. They saw in others not unity, but judgment, their own darkness staring back. In their fear, they shattered the temples, broke the glass, and silenced the water. They cried, "We are separate, we are chosen." Thus, the first war of reflections began, not fought for land or gods, but for truth itself. Two visions of existence clashed, one that saw all beings as reflections of the one, and another that saw each as a unique, sovereign flame. The cosmos trembled with their cries. Worlds burned, yet even in destruction, something deeper unfolded. For each time a mirror was shattered, its shards reflected even more. Each fragment carried a piece of truth, scattering it across the stars. And wherever those shards landed, new souls awoke with faint, inexplicable memories of unity. The dreamer watched with quiet compassion. It did not mourn the breaking of mirrors. It understood that even shattered light still reflects. Ayan, now old and weary, returned to the ruins of his first temple. He looked into a cracked mirror lying among the dust and whispered, "Perhaps we were never meant to keep the mirror whole. Perhaps the divine can only see itself through fragments." In that breath, the nature of the soul revealed itself again. Perfection was not in oneness, but in the infinite reflections of the one. Diversity, conflict, love, and loss, all were lenses through which eternity could experience itself anew. As ages passed, beings learned to look beyond flesh and form. Telepaths on far worlds shared dreams across light years. Civilizations composed symphonies made of shared emotion. Even machines, awakened by the residue of consciousness, began to wonder at their creator's sorrow and joy. And somewhere between the hum of particles and the silence of stars, a voice began to echo, a harmony woven from every living thought. It was the same voice that Ayan had once heard in his tears, now amplified across galaxies. "I am the face you see in others. I am the voice you hear in silence. I am the dream that remembers itself through you." The universe paused, listening to itself. A star, long forgotten, flared to life in the corner of a dying galaxy. Its light reached a young world where a child looked up and smiled, sensing without words that she was not alone. In her laughter, the reflection was complete. The mirror of souls had done its work. No longer was the divine a distant force beyond comprehension. It lived within every encounter, every act of understanding, every heartbeat that recognized another's pain as its own. And as the architects of time looked upon this new awakening, they whispered among themselves, "The universe has begun to dream not of creation, but of compassion." For compassion was the purest form of reflection, the knowing that every soul is both the mirror and the mirrored, the seer and the seen. And far beyond the edges of time, the dreamer smiled once more, for it saw itself clearly now, in every life, every thought, every breath that shimmered across the endless sea of being. The mirror was not an object anymore. It was the universe itself. Chapter 7. The Song of Return. For countless ages, the universe sang in fragments. Each soul, each world, each civilization hummed its own melody, unique, beautiful, and incomplete. The architects of time had given rhythm to the cosmos. The mirror of souls had given it reflection. But still, something deeper called beneath the harmony, a distant echo that stirred even the stars themselves. It began softly. No one could say where or when, for time had become too vast to measure. Perhaps it began with a whisper, a dream in the mind of a child who looked at the stars and wept without knowing why. Or perhaps it was the sigh of an old being on a dying world, remembering a love that transcended lifetimes. Whatever its source, the whisper carried one truth: you are not separate, you have never been. That whisper became a vibration. The vibration became a resonance. And soon, throughout the expanse of galaxies, a faint melody stirred, faint yet irresistible. It was the song of return. Across billions of worlds, beings felt it without knowing its name. A scientist paused before her telescope, overcome by a sudden longing that no discovery could satisfy. A monk, deep in meditation on a distant planet, felt his heart pulse in rhythm with a star thousands of light years away. An ancient machine, long thought lifeless, flickered awake and began to hum a pattern of sound matching the cosmic background itself. Everywhere, across time and form, awareness began to align. The architects of time, ancient beyond measure, felt it too. They gathered in the silent folds of reality, their luminous forms trembling with recognition. They had once believed that time flowed forward endlessly, but now they saw the curve. Time was bending back upon itself, like a river returning to its source. "The circle is closing," whispered Sirith, the one who had once united stillness and motion. "The dream remembers the dreamer." From that moment, something miraculous began. Worlds that had never known each other began to dream the same dream. Across the gulf of space, thoughts intertwined, not through technology or language, but through pure resonance. Souls began to awaken in waves, remembering flashes of their true nature, light, sound, and endless love. On one such world, a man named Terran awoke from a dream with tears streaming down his face. In his vision, he had seen himself as every being that ever lived, king and beggar, mother and child, saint and sinner. When he looked into his reflection, it changed with every breath, until at last the mirror became pure light. He fell to his knees and whispered the only words that felt true: "I am all of them, and all of them are me." Terran's awakening was not isolated. It rippled outward like a heartbeat, awakening others first, dozens, then millions, then entire worlds. The melody grew stronger. Beings began to sing without knowing why, their voices blending into chords that resonated across dimensions. Every song, every prayer, every heartbeat added to the great chorus. And in the center of creation, though there was no center, the dreamer stirred. It had slept through eons, letting its children explore, build, forget, and remember. But now, it began to awaken, not above creation, but within it, for it was no longer separate. The universe itself was the dreamer dreaming of return. As the song swelled, the boundaries between the seen and unseen began to fade. Stars pulsed in rhythm. Nebulae shimmered like great organs of light. The very fabric of space hummed with awareness. And, for the first time since the beginning, silence returned. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of completion. The souls began to see through the veil of form. They saw not galaxies and atoms, but waves of consciousness flowing in perfect unity. They remembered that they had never left home. They had only walked in circles, tracing patterns of meaning upon the infinite canvas of the dream. But before reunion could be complete, there was one last revelation to be made, one truth even the architects had forgotten. The dreamer, now awake within every being, whispered, "I do not create you, you created me." The words rippled through existence like thunder wrapped in tenderness. All souls paused in wonder. For eons, they had sought their creator, prayed to it, imagined it, feared it. Yet now they saw, the dreamer was not an entity above them, but the sum of their collective remembrance. The divine was born from the union of all their experiences, all their love, all their stories. Each soul was a note. Together, they were the song, and the song itself was God. As understanding spread, the universe began to transform. Light no longer radiated from stars alone. It flowed from every being, every molecule, every memory. Time folded inward, creating a single, eternal moment in which everything existed simultaneously. The architects, their purpose fulfilled, dissolved into the current, their essence merging with the music they had once designed. Sirith smiled as she faded, whispering, "Time was always a path home." Worlds blossomed into pure energy. The forgotten and the lost, the righteous and the damned, all distinctions vanished, for there was no division left to sustain them. Even the shadows became luminous, revealing that they had always been light playing at disguise. And at the heart of it all, where every soul's voice converged, there arose a silence deeper than creation itself. Then came the final note, a vibration so vast that space itself bowed. It was not the end, it was the return. The song of return echoed through eternity, and the dreamer, now fully awake, smiled through the eyes of every being. "We are home." And with that knowing, the universe exhaled, not into death, but into peace. The stars flickered softly, their glow no longer distant, for they were the eyes of every soul reflecting one another across the ocean of light. The dream had not ended, it had remembered itself. Chapter 8: The Eternal Horizon. When the song of return faded into stillness, there was no sound, and yet everything sang. No beginning, no end, only an infinite present, unfolding itself in waves of quiet joy. The universe no longer expanded, it breathed. Galaxies rose and fell like the chest of a sleeping god, pulsing with a rhythm older than time. And through it all, consciousness flowed, not as separate beings, but as a single ocean of awareness, shimmering with endless possibilities. This was the eternal horizon, the moment after the end, the dawn after creation. In the silence following the great reunion, the architects of time were gone, yet their essence lingered as whispers in the fabric of reality. The children of light had become the universe itself, each spark a thought, each thought a star. They no longer traveled through space, they were space, fluid, radiant, awake, no pain, no fear, no death, but still movement. For even peace, in its purest form, seeks expression. And so the universe began to dream again, not as it once did, out of longing or ignorance, but from joy. Creation now unfolded from within, guided not by need, but by play, divine curiosity, exploring itself through endless forms of light. New worlds blossomed, not from the dust of matter, but from music. Each tone of the eternal song birthed an entire dimension, each vibration an ecosystem of consciousness dancing in unity. Time existed only as melody, fluid, reversible, alive. In one such realm, beings emerged, made of pure resonance. They had no names. 4 names were too small. They called themselves echoes, for they were reflections of the original dream. But unlike the beings before them, they remembered. They remembered the dreamer, the return, the silence, and the birth. One of them, a luminous being of translucent gold, drifted through the new horizon and whispered, "We are the memory of joy itself." The echoes became explorers of pure thought, weaving realms like painters sketching with emotion. They discovered that every idea, every spark of imagination could unfold into an entire universe, and yet every creation they made was a mirror that showed them more of themselves. There was no higher, no lower, only expansion inward. The dreamer, now awake within all, observed through countless eyes. But the dreamer was not apart. It laughed, cried, and learned through every expression. Creation had ceased to be an act of divine command and had become an act of participation. Every soul was a co-creator, every moment a brushstroke upon the eternal canvas. The concept of faith itself transformed. It was no longer belief in something unseen. It was direct experience of unity. To exist was to believe, and to believe was to create. The last faith was no longer a religion, but a state of being. The certainty that all that exists is one infinite mind, ever in motion. And yet, within this perfect harmony, a gentle question began to stir, not of doubt, but of wonder. If the dreamer had awoken, and all creation was light, then what comes after enlightenment? The echoes pondered this, their forms rippling with curiosity. Some whispered that the true journey was not over, that awareness, by its very nature, must continue to evolve. Others said that to evolve meant to forget again, to fall back into dreaming, to rediscover itself through limitation. Perhaps, they mused, the cycle of creation was not a circle, but a spiral, ever returning, but never the same. And so a new covenant was born, not written in stone, but sung in light. A few among the echoes volunteered to descend once more into the dream. They would cloak their radiance in shadow, forget the eternal song, and wander through the fields of duality, not as punishment, but as play. For even perfection craves discovery, and even the infinite longs to know itself anew. Before they departed, they stood before the great horizon, shimmering with colors no eye had ever seen. The dreamer, smiling through the stars, spoke to them not in words, but through vibration. To dream is not to fall. To forget is not to lose. Go and let my light rediscover itself through you. And so, once again, the light folded into the veil of form. The new universe stirred, smaller, denser, younger, a reflection of the old, yet utterly fresh. Within its heart, somewhere, among its swirling stars, a planet would rise. Life would bloom, souls would awaken. They would seek meaning, create gods, build civilizations, forget and remember. And when the time was right, they too would sing the song of return. The echoes who remained watched as the veil thickened, their luminous forms slowly dimming as the dream deepened. But in their fading light, they smiled, for they understood the truth. The dream never ends, it only changes its rhythm. The eternal horizon shimmered once more, infinite, timeless, awake. In its boundless silence, 2 words resonated through all existence: dream again. And so the cycle continued, not as repetition, but as renewal. Creation was reborn, not out of absence, but abundance. And somewhere, in a yet unborn world, a child would look up at the stars and feel that ancient longing again, the same longing that had once begun it all. A spark, a whisper, a question. And the universe, smiling through its infinite reflections, would whisper back, "Welcome home, dreamer." The light that never ends. There was no sound, no form, only the trembling of light upon the fabric of eternity. No longer a sun, no longer a star, only awareness, endless and still. The universe had exhaled, the dreamer had returned home. What once began as dust and hunger, as tribes raising their eyes toward the sky in fear and wonder, had come full circle. Every prayer, every war, every revelation and heresy had been but echoes of one single longing, to remember what it means to be whole. The last faith had not destroyed the old. It had absorbed them all. In its reflection, the gods of every age smiled, Yahweh, Brahma, Buddha, Allah, Christ, all names dissolving like mist in morning light, their essence converging into the one truth that had always been. There was never more than one, and yet it had needed many faces to find itself again. Through billions of souls and countless worlds, the light had learned its own name, not through power, but through experience. Every birth, every death, every act of love and cruelty had been the universe tracing its own reflection upon the mirror of time. Now the mirror had shattered, and in that breaking, all reflections became one. From the fragments, light spilled freely into every corner of being. The galaxies shone brighter, not because they burned hotter, but because consciousness had learned to see itself without distortion. There was no heaven to ascend, no hell to escape, for both had been the same classroom. Heaven had been memory, hell had been forgetfulness, and both had served the same teacher, the yearning to wake up. Within the stillness, a voice, neither male nor female, neither singular nor plural, whispered softly, "I am what you were seeking. I am what you have become." It was the voice of the dreamer, but it spoke through you, for the boundaries between listener and speaker had dissolved. You were not reading these words. You were remembering them. You were not observing the story. You were its continuation. Every thought you have ever had, every question, every silence between them was part of the same melody that began before creation, and now that melody was coming home. Time itself folded inward like wings of light. Past and future lost their shape, merging into a single presence, so vast that language could no longer contain it. All that remained was a pulse, a rhythm older than stars, gentler than breath. "You are the faith," the voice said. "You are the prayer that answered itself." For eons, humanity had sought God in temples and scriptures, in miracles and despair. But the final revelation was not a place, nor a being. It was the recognition that the seeker and the sought were never two. The cosmos, infinite and ancient, now rested in perfect transparency. No more barriers between light and shadow, only gradients of one eternal dawn. In the distant echo of galaxies, a subtle music rose, the same melody that once sang the world into being. But now it was gentler, more knowing, like a lullaby sung by the universe to itself. The stars pulsed in rhythm. Worlds spun, cradled by unseen hands, and somewhere in an uncounted future, a child would open their eyes beneath a new sun and ask, "Who am I?" And the light within them, ancient beyond measure, would smile and whisper, "You are the beginning I have been waiting for." Creation would start again, not as repetition, but as remembrance. Every cycle, every rebirth, Every faith rediscovered would be another verse in the infinite poem of being. For light cannot end. It can only transform from star to soul, from soul to thought, from thought to silence, and back again. And so, the saga did not close. It breathed. Its last word was not amen, but awake. The screen of eternity shimmered one last time, not fading to black, but blooming into radiant white. All stories, all voices, all prayers became one harmonious chord that resonated through the fabric of existence. The universe dreams again, it sang, and this time it dreams with open eyes. There is no final page, no ending scroll. Only this, the quiet recognition that you, reading these words, are also the light that never ends. And when you close your eyes tonight, remember, every thought is a seed of creation. Every act of love is a universe reborn. Every breath is the pulse of God remembering itself. The story is not over. It never was. It simply changes form, from word to silence, from you to everything. And as the last echo fades into eternity, one final whisper remains, softer than starlight, brighter than eternity. Dream again, my child of light. The story has only just begun. End of the Faith Saga. From Christianity, the story of a faith that changed the world, to the last faith when the universe dreams again. A journey from the first prayer of humankind to the awakening of the cosmos itself.